Hello, everyone. Good evening. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our fourth EFACIS Roundtable discussion. As you know, thanks to our big and vibrant EFACIS community, we at the European Federation of Associations and Centers of Irish Studies are in the very happy situation of being able to initiate, run, and become involved in various exciting Irish studies projects, which are always situated at the intersection of culture, research, and third-level education. Ongoing projects and publications at present are, among others, Kaleidoscope 2, you can find out more about that on our website, Literature as Translation number 4, this time translating an Enright, and the EFACIS book series Irish Studies in Europe is also thriving with 2 books that came out in 2021. And I can share the screen here maybe to give you a brief impression. Stage Irish, Performance Identity, Cultural Circulation. This volume was edited by Paul Fagan, Dieter Fuchs, and Tamara Rennhak. And earlier this year, and of particular interest also in our context here today, Daniel Becker's book monograph entitled On the Threshold of Memory, National History and Liminal Remembrance in Contemporary Irish Poetry. The most recent volumes of this book series are immediately available to all EFACIS members via a login and password available from our coordinator Seán on the website, and they are available for everyone after 2 years of publication. You can then just find them on our website, also without the password. Also, I am very happy to say that today has seen the restart of our Irish Itinerary podcast, 28th episode of our Irish Itinerary podcast. And we restarted after a rather long summer break and published earlier today Jessica Bundschuh's interview with Stephen Sexton. You're of course happy to also download all the other episodes. And if you're interested in recording an interview with your favorite Irish author or artist whom you are ideally also working on, don't hesitate to contact Seán or myself. The most exciting event of our EFACIS endeavors this month is, of course, today's launch of issue 4.2 of RISE, Review in Irish Studies in Europe, entitled Wrapping Our Hands Around Copies of This Book to Medbh McGuckian at 70. And I would like to give a very warm welcome to the colleagues who were and are actively involved in the production and publication of this issue. And so thank you for having put your incredible academic energies, your scholarly enthusiasm, and also simply a lot of work into RISE, Review of Irish Studies in Europe for EFACIS. My very special thanks go to Daniela Theinová, the editor of this special issue, who took over from Shane Alcubia-Murphy in difficult times. Thank you so much, Daniela. And I would also like to give a special mention to Seán Del Tour, our new EFACIS coordinator, who has been a great support from the very first day she started on the job. John Crosson, our esteemed general editor of RISE, will certainly pay tribute to all the contributors and everyone involved individually. And from me at this point, therefore, just a brief thanks. I'm immensely grateful, and I've enjoyed reading all your articles, and I've learned a lot. Maeve is not still with us, so I'll welcome her warmly later. Of course, we are thrilled and proud that she will join us for this event tonight. That's really a great honor. Over to you, Seán.
Thank you, Kathy. It's more an pleasure agus honor gumsa chainslib a nacht agus ta false word a gachten a Berkeley and Shaw dan sholu anocht the agra nua the our Irish review of Irish studies in Europe. It's a great pleasure to be with you all here and to welcome you all to our launch of RISE 4.2. I'm not going to speak for very long. I'll hand over to Daniela in a few moments. I just wanted to give you a very few kind of overview of a brief few words about RISE, what we are and what we do and what we're dedicated to. And you'll find more information on our journal at risejournal.eu. We were established in 2016, as Kathy has already mentioned. Our founding editor was Professor Seán Murphy. And from the beginning, we've been focused on developing a high quality, international, open access, peer-reviewed, multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary journal that publishes articles and reviews in what's become a very broad field of Irish studies. So we accept submissions, not just as this issue is dedicated to poetry, but we also welcome issues across the field of literature in both languages, in both English and the Irish language, and the areas of history, film, visual culture, politics, translation, music, and the social sciences more broadly. We welcome, of course, submissions, whether it's submissions directly for non-themed issues, or if you have a theme that you're interested in proposing, we'd welcome suggestions for themed issues as well, and they should all be sent to myself at rise@efacis.eu, and I'll share that email again in the chat. As I said, our journal is at risejournal.eu. So the issue that we're celebrating and launching tonight is the 8th issue to date, as Kathy has referred to. My predecessor, Seán Murphy, this was initially his initiative. Unfortunately, Seán couldn't bring it through, and we're really grateful to Daniela for the extraordinary work she has done in taking on this issue, in bringing together the contributors, in bringing Medbh into the issue as well, and hopefully Medbh will be able to join us. It's an extraordinary achievement on so many levels, and I think the evidence is in the issue itself. And of course, in thanking Daniela, I'm also extending thanks and our appreciation to all of the contributors to this issue who have brought such energy and such insight into our understanding of Medbh's work. And I know Daniela will introduce each of you shortly, so I won't say more in that regard, only to thank you all again for what you've done, to Danielle for what she's brought together. Kathy has also mentioned Seán, and Seán is also somebody who rejoined, I should say, as coordinator of EFACIS. She, from having been with us several years ago, but only quite recently. So Seán came in and really did extraordinary work in working with Daniela and myself in bringing together this issue and bringing together not just, and this is also an issue that's a first for us, because not only are we bringing together some wonderful contributions and of course a really fascinating interview with Medbh herself, but also we have audio integrated into the issue itself. And it's really fantastic to be able to listen to Medbh read her own poetry. And Seán, thank you for the great work you did in making that possible as well. I should finally just to thank the editorial board for their support as ever in bringing this issue to publication, to Joost Augustine, to Elke Docker, to Sylvie Mikowski, who's also a reviews editor, to Kathy, and of course to Daniela herself. And thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate and to mark this occasion. And just to let you know that, as Kathy has mentioned, we will early in the new year be making a recording of this issue available as well on our RISE platform, on our homepage and through YouTube. So please do let your friends, let your colleagues, let your students know that we are here, that we will continue to work to bring the finest research and work in Irish studies to scholars and to readers, not just in Europe, but also across the world. So thank you, and I'll hand over to Danielle at this point.
It's an absolute thrill to be able to welcome you all on my part to this EFACIS Roundtable event. And for this is indeed in several respects a very special and festive occasion. Not only are we launching our new issue of RISE, but the main reason that we have gathered here and figuratively in the pages of the journal has been to celebrate the poetry of one of Ireland's most eminent poets, Medbh McGuckian, and her important anniversary. It's an immense honor to be chairing this event, and I'm extremely grateful to the contributors who have found the time to be present and introduce their articles as part of the launch. I know that some of them have had several events going tonight. I'm aware that this is an incredibly busy part of the year and academic calendar, so thank you all for being here. And we hopefully will be fortunate enough to be joined later on today by Medbh McGuckian herself. And I'm very grateful to Medbh, not only for having accepted our invitation, but also for contributing poems for the issue and for being a part of the preparation process at several stages as well. So welcome everybody. I'm delighted to have everyone here in virtual Brussels/Prague. When I became member of the editorial board of RISE in January this year, I had little idea what was in store. In March, I was sending out requests for peer reviews and invitations for potential new contributions to this very special issue. And the whole project had been initiated by Seán Murphy, the former general editor of RISE, more than a year earlier. While it has been an incredible honor for me to be working with these wonderful people and brilliant scholars, it's also been very humbling to be taken over where Seán Murphy, a leading authority in McGuckian scholarship, left off. But above all, it's been a gift to be able again to work with these amazing scholars and experts and to immerse myself once again in Medbh's amazing work. And it's been an incredibly enriching experience in many different ways. I want to thank EFACIS and RISE for this opportunity and for the extraordinary support we have received during the preparation and editing process. And maybe I'll say my thanks at this point for the fear of there not being enough time at the end. So thank you to everyone who got involved in the process, my colleagues at the editorial board, the president of EFACIS, Professor Katharina Rennhak, the general editor of RISE, Dr. Seán Crosson, Professor Elke Docker, Dr. Joost Augustijn, Professor Sylvie Mikowski, who's responsible for the entire review section. And indeed, huge thanks go to our wonderful new EFACIS coordinator, Seán for her incredible support and excellent technical skills and assistance. I have no idea where I would be without you, Seán. So, and thanks are due also to those amazing student assistants at the Anglistic in Wuppertal, Sarah Schulz and Alexandra Deibel. I hope I'm not forgetting anyone here who helped in a very important way in the editing process again. Medbh McGuckian, I'm sure, needs no lengthy introduction, but I'll say a few words anyway by way of welcoming her on board virtually, on board in the pages of the issue and by introducing the issue as such. Medbh is without doubt one of Ireland's leading poets, and over the past 45 years, one of the most intriguing and original voices, presences in Anglophone poetry in general. She's also one of the most prolific Irish poets, with 16 collections of poetry under her belt, published by eminent publishers again, such as Oxford University Press, Gallery Press, Wake Forest University Press, and Arlen House. Her career took off in the late 1970s following her triumph in the national poetry competition. And from the beginning, her poetry has been passionately read and passionately loved, and sometimes as passionately disputed over by readers and scholars. And it has attracted a great deal of critical scholarly attention. Though it has often been described as opaque, even coded or esoteric, it has equally been praised for its imaginative power and subversive agency, its capacity to ask questions about individual consciousness, human guilt and suffering, the supposed duality of the body and mind, or the usefulness and moral responsibility of art and poetry, while simultaneously addressing some of the most pressing issues and crises of our times. It has always puzzled and intrigued us as readers, and when deciding on the title for this issue, I couldn't resist but use a line from one of Maev's new poems, which she was so kind as to share with us and let us include in the issue. A line which captures, I'd say, our willingness, we could say eagerness to keep trying to wrap our heads around Maev's work, her individual books and poems. And this fact is duly illustrated, I would say, by the articles to be found in the issue. In its pages, 7 international scholars and leading experts on McGuckian's work have come together to highlight important points in the poet's career, to trace continuities and developments across the entire effort. And many more members of the McGuckian critical family have been involved in the process of the issue's making, the making of this festive issue, by way of providing peer reviews or by having their work cited and referenced by our contributors. The individual articles gathered in the issue address Maev's work through a number of diverse foci, and these include the work's engagement with the troubles and their competing representations in historical and cultural memory, limitations of representation in art, and questions of knowledge, faith, and skepticism. In the first part of this launch, we'll introduce the articles as they appear in the issue, where they have been arranged chronologically according to which part of the poet's work and career they focus on. And after having heard from our panelists here, there'll be some time for a discussion and questions from those in attendance. So maybe I'd like to use this moment before I pass over to our panelists and contributors to encourage you to come up with your questions at that point. You can do so either by raising your hand in Zoom, or maybe best just typing your name in the chat, or the question indeed in the chat at that point. And in the latter part of this special roundtable discussion and launch, we will hopefully have the privilege to hear Medbh McGuckian read from the poems that are brought to you by our issue of Rise. And hopefully she will talk to us a little about her creative process. And she also mentioned that if there is time left, she'd be willing to take questions. And now, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker here today, Maureen Fadem. Maureen is a professor of English at Kingsborough Community College at City University of New York. She is the author of an important monograph dedicated to the structural and conceptual use of silence in McGuckian's poetry, entitled Silence and Articulacy in the Poetry of Medbh McGuckian. It was published in 2019. Last year, Routledge published Maureen's book on objects and intertexts in Toni Morrison's Beloved, and a collection of essays co-edited with Michael Sullivan on the economics of empire genealogies of capital and the colonial encounter. Currently, Maureen has 3 book projects in the making, including The Poetics of the Fragment, Thinking the Border, of which the present contribution, I believe, is to be part in some form, and which I can't wait to read in its entirety once it's out. In her piece for the current issue, Maureen offers a unique insight into the basis of McGuckian's poetics by focusing on the poet's prose diaries from the earliest stages of her career. The title of Maureen's essay is Architecting the Carceral Stage, the Fragment in Medbh McGuckian's Diaries and Walter Benjamin's Thesis. Maureen, with this I step away and the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Daniela. I appreciate that. This article was really long in the making. I, had read the diaries, around the, short right after they came out, so 20 years ago, and have, loved these texts particularly as, part of Medbh but yet I'd never written anything on them. I had only ever focused on the poetry in my own, analysis. And in fact, the book that came out my book on Medbh that came out in 2019, the original plan was for there to be this chapter or a chapter on the diaries in that book, and it just didn't happen. I just stayed in the poetry and never left, And so then, yeah, when I got the notice, the original notice email about this special issue, I thought, well, now's the time, now's the time. No more delays. So, kind of where this started was that I read these diaries. They appeared around the same time that I was in grad school. I'd been in grad school for a few years, and I was around that same time also studying Walter Benjamin for the first time. And so one of the things that really struck me originally were the strange and also fascinating for me connections and similarities between McGuckian's diaries in particular, Medbh's diaries in particular, which are different from the poems in some important ways. Obviously, they're diaries, not poems, but different in terms of their composition, their crafting, and Benjamin's theses on the philosophy of history, which, I'm a great fan of both Medbh and Walter, and I think, but the theses are quite important to me and important to a lot of us, right? And so I was struck, by the fact that the diaries are a very sort of rarefied, strange type of text. They are diaries, and we know that because they're called a diary. But if Medbh hadn't said that, like in the first title, I don't know that we would be certain that they are diaries. And so they are diaries, but unusual, and not like any other diary that I have ever read. Similarly, the theses on the philosophy of history and so much of what Benjamin wrote and how he wrote his work is just, a genre, a type of essay that, kind of we hadn't really seen before, that an essay in fragments and an essay, that is interspersed, the theses being sort of liberally peppered with quotations, marked quotations. We're familiar with an essay that has an epigraph, but what we're not familiar with as much is an essay in fragments, and which is then peppered, as I said, or interspersed with much liberal quoting. So what was remarkable to me was that Medbh's method in the diaries was kind of almost exactly the same. There are a few key differences, which I talk about in the article. And that is that her diaries are, I don't know if everyone has read them, so just But the diaries are broken up into monthly, not daily entries. But the diary entries are surrounded, prefaced, and ended by marked quotations, and also sometimes interrupted by marked quotations. And so once again, a kind of text that, I'd never seen before. What struck me was how these texts were both so unique, the theses and the diaries of Maeve, but also so similar themselves. And so that's really kind of the question that I started with, is trying to think through what, what is it that brought these very, far afield authors to this very similar and also quite unique form. And so that's kind of where I started. Working on it, then I also discovered other important convergences between Walter Benjamin and Medbh McGuckian, one of which being, here's Medbh, we can see you now.
Yeah, I'm so happy to see all of you. I'm sorry about the mess up, but I'm listening. You go ahead.
All right, I don't know, okay.
But don't laugh, Maureen.
No laughing. All right. So the other thing was that as I worked and got to know Walter Benjamin better and continued working on Maeve, I also discovered that as writers and thinkers, Walter and Maeve share much more than just two strange texts that happen to be very similar. And one of those things is that they're both collectors, and they collect the same thing, which is quotations, right? Maeve, as we know, right, has notebooks and notebooks and notebooks at the archive filled with quotations from her reading or from wherever. And of course, Walter Benjamin had the same collection, obviously not the same, his own collection of quotations, meaningful phrases that he would see, or things people said to him, or things that he's also read in books, and he would collect them and sort of amassed a trove of quotations. And isn't it remarkable that that is exactly the same thing Medbh McGuckian has done as a poet and writer herself? And so this was important. And one of the things too that I and this is like a second question, I guess, that I started with in this article is, Walter Benjamin, as Hannah Arendt tells us in the introduction to Illuminations, right? Walter's greatest ambition as a writer was to write the kind of text Medbh McGuckian writes. That is to say, his greatest ambition as an author was to produce a text made up entirely of quotations, right? In which he had not contributed his own original writing, but that the text would literally be what McGuckian's poems often are, which is a stitching of fragments. The fragments being the quotations. And we see this, right? And if we look at the diary, look at the theses on the philosophy of history, which in my article, I use a different title on the expression of history. When we look at them, we see that quoting, right? We see the trove sort of borrowed from and imported into these texts. But so that to me is remarkable. Sort of, if we remember again back to Benjamin in another one of his texts, The Task of the Translator, right? Those of you familiar with Benjamin may have read it and remember the metaphor of the broken vase, right? And how he uses that metaphor as his way of explaining. Oh, sorry, my Apple Watch just starts talking. He uses that broken vase that is then reassembled and glued back together, right, as his metaphor for translation. And but that isn't that exactly what Medbh McGuckian does as a poet, and isn't that exactly what Benjamin did or wanted to do. And he was different. He wasn't known as a poet. He did write literary work, but that's, you know, his sort of job or whatever it was as a philosopher. So he didn't have, right, the poetic license that poets like Maeve and others, you know, have. So, but that's the second question then that I sort of started with is, you know, what is this collecting? Why is this shattered vase re-glued together, visibly re-glued together, therefore not the vase it was, right? This translation, visibly translated, therefore not what it was. But yet a semblance, right? A semblance of what it had been. So this poem, right, of Medbh McGuckian, which is stitched together, or this wished for work that had Walter not perished, not taken his life when he did, he might eventually have written that text, right, that he wanted to write, but we didn't, right? We didn't get there. But the idea that why is it that, what is the importance of this text that is this visibly assembled thing? And that assembly we see so clearly in Mave's diaries, right? That because in the diaries, the quotes are marked. So we see the quotes around, you know, the original diary content, sometimes multiple quotes following an item of original diary content. We see the quotes in Benjamin's theses. We see that stitching, right? And so those are really the questions that I started with, and so my article is really just a start toward answering those questions and trying to discover these significances. My focus became in that, the fragment and the use of the fragment, and what does that mean, and why this stitching, which is a stitching of which is a stitching, right? The stitching together of quotes and of original material with quotes. It is the creation of something new, but it is the creation of something new out of something, out of history, out of something past. And I think that's one reason it was important for Benjamin. I think that's another reason it's important for Maeve, sort of thinking about history, the history of the North, the Troubles, and this idea, right, of the production of a text as also a resurrection, right, Maeve? That idea of resurrection being so important in your work, and you use the term resurrective. You say somewhere, is it Blarismore? You say resurrective verses, and I've always loved that, and I think I quote that in the article probably, but that's also what Walter Benjamin was doing. He was writing resurrective thinking, thought, philosophy, right? Thought, and so yeah, that's where I'm at right now. And I think I think of this article really just as a beginning, as a start toward making sense of some of these things. So thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Maureen. That's fascinating. And I think what you've just done is to cleverly tease people to go and read your fascinating contribution, which I think makes for a brilliant opening piece for the entire issue, and speaks in some very interesting and important ways to several of the other pieces in the collection, through the motifs of the fragments, the materiality of the poetic image, again, the elusive yet insistently present figure of the angel on the part of Benjamin's text, of course. And I think we will come to these connections in the Q&A, because there's a lot of options of interface there, and many points for discussion. I just urge anyone here to go and read Maureen's insights, not only into McGuckian's prose diaries, but into the key questions of the boundaries of literary and poetic text as such, of poetry as such, which Maureen's been able to tease out in such a revelatory way by reading the autobiographical writings side by side with Benjamin's thesis. Yeah.
Can I also just say, I meant to say, sorry, I would love, yeah, for people to read this article, and I would love to discuss it, you know, or I don't know, get, you know, talk to, you know, you all about how you answer those questions, or, you know, just, yeah. Thank you, Daniela.
Perfect, brilliant. And I also should mention that this piece is not your only contribution to the issue, which also includes an interview with Maeve, conducted by yourself and Mary Maddock. And we'll hear about the interview from your co-author in a short while. So now in the next bit, I'll briefly summarize 3 of the contributions whose authors could not, unfortunately, join us today. The next essay in the issue is by Richard Kirkland, who is Professor of Irish Literature at King's College London. And Richard's piece, titled Turning One Sort of Poetry into Another, Medbh McGuckian's Captain Lavender and the Surface Reader, focuses on McGuckian's 5th collection from 1994 and argues for its cultural importance and its pivotal role in the ever and its overall reception as well. It outlines new possibilities or new possible approaches to Mave's work, highlighting its accepted political but also underlying poetic and metapoetic agendas. And our next panelist was to be Eric Falci, who is Professor of English at the University of California, Berkeley, but unfortunately Eric likewise had to excuse himself in the last minute. In his piece for the present issue of Rise, Eric centers on McGuckian's visual poetics. And again, I absolutely recommend his essay to your attention. It's titled Image of Something Without Images, Seeing Poems in the Face of the Earth. And in the article, he focuses on the act of seeing, on the part of the poet and the reader. And he mentions the heavenwards gaze of some of the poems in the face of the earth and illustrates how this turn of the century collection marked new ways, as he says, in or of lyric investigation in the books that appear after it, including the book of The Angel from 2004, which happens to be the focus of the next article in the issue by Jefferson Holdridge. Jeff is a director of Wake Forest University Press, and that publishing house under his directorship has played a key role in bringing Irish poets and Northern Irish poets to the American reader, including many collections by Medbh McGuckian that have been published simultaneously on both sides of the Atlantic, and in some cases in the US in the first place. And Jeff's contribution to the current issue of Rise is titled A Roar of Wings, Faith, Skepticism, the Sublime, in Medbh McGuckian's The Book of the Angel. And in his piece, in the issue, Jeff offers a detailed, thorough reading of the collection as a whole, and he duly emphasizes the prominent, though shadowy presence, again, of these winged figures and images in Medbh's recent poetry, and shows us how these can help us grasp some important connections between aesthetic, poetic, and nosological concerns of the poetry as such. And angels, of course, maintain their insistent presence again in the poems by Medbh included in this issue, even though it's possible that, as one of the poems has it, the present does not exist for an angel. And as such, they are also mentioned or discussed in some of the other contributions in the issue. And this is also the case for the next piece here, and of our next panelist, who is Fanni Fekete-Nagy, whose contribution also highlights or points out the richness of biblical imagery and allusions as such in McGuckian's work. Fanni is a PhD student at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest, And in her research, she focuses on Irish poetry in both English and Irish, and her doctoral research centers on the role of allusions in the poetry of Eleni Cholonoin, Mulani Gonal, and Medbh McGuckian. Currently, she holds an external teaching position at Károly Gáspár University in Budapest. And I first met Fanni a few years ago when she attended a PhD conference organized by the Center of Irish Studies in Prague, presenting on McGuckian's poetry. So it was really nice to see her name included in the group of contributors, potential contributors who responded to Shane Alcobia Murphy's original call for papers a few years back. In her article for this issue, Fanni close reads 4 poems from across Medbh McGuckian's work in order to explore the role, and this is the title of the piece, of cultural memory and images of resurrection in Medbh McGuckian's commemorative poems. So you can take it away, Fanni, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that introduction. And I'm really happy to be here and to be able to tell you part of my research, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion afterwards. So thank you again for the opportunity. And as Daniela has mentioned, so this article came out of part of my PhD research that I am still working on. And I was just really intrigued by Medbh McGuckian's use of allusions. And that's what I started looking at, and then started connecting this to the idea or the concept of cultural memory. So in my article, I discussed the ways in which Medbh McGuckian commemorates the dead in her poems. I focus on different allusions in 4 commemorative poems. The first one that I analyzed is the Aisling Hat, written in memory of the poet's father. The second one is Forcing Music to Speak, which commemorates Robert Emmet. The third poem is The Temple of Janus, which was published in the 1998 collection Shamalier, written in memory of the United Irishmen Rebellion of 1798. And the last poem I discuss in the article is The Blood Trolley, commemorating the death of the poet's mother. The 4 poems are from different collections. 2 of them were written in memory of family members, and the other 2 commemorate historical figures. I suggest that despite their differences, the strategies of commemoration are similar in all of them, and they raise similar questions regarding the ethics of commemoration, the responsibility of the artist, and the possibility of consolation. Another feature that links these 4 poems is that they all contain allusions to historical events, as well as artists of the past, painters, poets, and writers as well. And interestingly, all 4 poems use biblical allusions connected to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I really liked how Maureen finished on this idea of resurrection, so I'm kind of continuing from there. But in this case, in my interpretation, through these allusions, the possibility of consolation in grief through religion is questioned again and again in these poems. I analyzed the poems from the perspective of cultural memory, and I argue that Medbh McGuckian commemorates the dead not by trying to create individual textual monuments for them, but instead by linking their memories to historical, mythical, and literary figures whose memories already live on in various forms today. In this way, the memory of the people commemorated by the poems is connected to already existing traditions and aspects of cultural heritage. On the one hand, this reflects the ever-changing and problematic nature of memory and forgetting, while on the other hand, there is also a sense that by attaching the memory of the dead to other existing memories, these people in the poems are more likely to remember it in the future as well. In terms of cultural memory then, I have not viewed the poems as an end result, as literary texts that display how historical events or figures are being remembered, but I've read them as points along the process or timeline, if you will, of cultural memory. These poems engage with the past in various ways, but they also shape the future of memories by reviving some near forgotten texts or works, and by creating new and surprising parallels and connections between existing traditions and memories. And all of this is achieved through an intricate web of allusions. And the way I use the term allusion requires some explanation. Medbh McGuckian's poetic technique that Maureen also already mentioned, and I'm sure we will discuss it as well later on, of incorporating words and phrases from her impressive variety of readings has been much analyzed before. But I've decided to interpret these textual borrowings as allusions in a more traditional sense. And this has allowed me to compare these textual fragments that Medbh McGuckian uses to build her poems to somewhat more recognizable allusions or quotations or mottos in her poems, and treating these as, quote, the smallest examinable link in cultural memory, as Peter David Hazy calls allusions. And these allusions and references are often multi-layered. I would like to give you an example from the Temple of Janus, which is the third poem that I analyzed in my article. This was published in 1998 at the bicentenary of the United Irishmen Rebellion of 1798. The poem itself is made up of fragments from Marianne Lecouré's biography of the 17th century painter Peter Paul Rubens, who lived and worked during the 30 Years' War. The poem creates links between the United Irishmen Rebellion, the 30 Years' War, and since the collection in which it appeared in was published in the year of the Good Friday Agreement, there is also a connection to the Northern Irish Troubles, and the poem commemorates the victims of these conflicts. Daniela, can I ask you to show the first painting that I've sent her, asked her to help me with this? So this painting is called The Consequences of War by Rubens, and this is where the poem takes its title from. I don't know if you can see it on the image, but on the left-hand side, you can see the temple. That's the temple of Janus, the Roman god. And when the door of the temple is open, that symbolizes war. And there's the allegorical figure of the god of war bursting forward from the temple. And some of these figures are trying to hold him back, and some of them are urging him on. In the first part of the poem, there is also an almost naturalistic description of dead bodies, the victims of violence. By contrast, the last section of the poem borrows phrases from the book on Rubens that describe the second painting, that is called The Incredulity of St. Thomas. And this depicts the scene from the Gospel of John, where doubting Thomas first sees the resurrected Christ, who reveals his wounds to him, and then Thomas believes. So you can see here that it is the painting that directly alludes to the Bible. And the allusion in Medbh McGuckian's poem is distanced from its source. So you can see that there are 4 steps. So from the Bible, we go to the painting, and the painting is described in the book on Rubens, which is read and then used in the poem by Medbh McGuckian. And this layering kind of displaces the hope or belief in resurrection. And Rubens's painting also depicts Thomas on the verge of faith, but not quite believing yet. So the poem begins with the consequences of war and the striking description of corpses, which captures this inherent paradox that it is both necessary, but also almost impossible to artistically represent the consequences of violence. But then the poem ends with this distanced image of the risen Christ revealing his side, that suggests that there is a hope of healing and of new life, but the wound itself remains. In a similar vein, the other poems analyzed in my article also engage with the difficult questions of how the dead can and should be commemorated, and the unique use of biblical allusions suggests that there is no easy or quick consolation in grief, but they still do offer a glimpse of hope in these commemorative poems. So this is what I planned on sharing with you tonight. I really hope that you will go on and read the article itself, and maybe read and reread the poems that I mentioned, and maybe read them from a different perspective as well. And I would be really glad to take any questions or ideas or suggestions that you might have in the discussion later on. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a million, Fanny, there. Thank you again for an excellent contribution and presentation. And I think in the contribution, by focusing on the commemorative thrust of these poems, you tease out again the complex aesthetic and notional interplay that's always part of a McGuckian poem, while also touching on the ethics of grief and commemoration. And I think all these make up for the idea of cultural memory that you present there in the article, which again, I encourage everyone here to go and read. And this focus in your article on cultural or shared and yet diversified historical memory transitions us, I'll say, to the next piece in the issue, and to our next panelist, who is Jessica Bundschuh. Jessica is a lecturer in English literatures and cultures at the University of Stuttgart. She has published on Irish performance poetics and transnational ekphrastic poetry. Her critical work has appeared in many journals, among others in Poetics Today, the Paris Review, Columbia Review, Culture and Environment, and Literary Imagination. Jessica is a poet herself, and her work has recently been published in The Moth and the Long Poem magazine. And her current research project is on the Irish prose poem. And being familiar with Jessica's incredibly astute and inspired approach to literary criticism, I really look forward to reading the results of this research. By a lovely coincidence, as it has been mentioned already, Jessica's contribution to another core EFACIS project, the Irish Itinerary Podcast, has also been launched today. So I'd urge you not only to read Jessica's piece in our Rise issue, which is a must for anyone who is interested in Medbh McGuckian's work, and especially her recent output, but also listen to Jessica's interview with another Belfast poet, Stephen Sexton, on the EFACIS website. Jessica's piece in this issue takes as its focus Medbh's 2016 collection, Blarish Moor, and the poems therein which reflect on how some of the key events and worst moments of violence in the Northern Irish conflict have been embedded in the diverse and conflicting versions of cultural memory. And the title of the article is Testimonial Side Shadowing, the Narrative Hospitality of Medbh McGuckian's Blarish Moor. So without further delay, Jessica, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much. And I have to say such a big thanks of gratitude for Daniela for taking over this issue. It was so, and your encouragement through the whole process, and also for EFACIS too, for kind of bringing this issue back to life, because it had sort of lying dormant for years. So thank you very much. I can't express my gratitude for that. So in terms of this particular piece, it also had sort of, taken this long journey of also sort of laying dormant and then coming back to life in different forms. I first had presented it as a paper at a conference, the Anglistentag here in Germany, and I was thinking specifically about material objects in that particular version. But then what had happened is that I began to, and I'm grateful for Maureen's discussion of things like the broken vase and this idea of the collector, because a lot of things had to be refashioned as I continually saw that Medbh's poems asked us to get new rubrics, new models, because the old models didn't work. But I'll start first with, since I was also trying to understand Medbh's process, I'll start with my process. And it began with hearing what we all, I'm sure, are very, very grateful to, and that is the UCD Irish Poetry Archive. Such a great gift to have those audio, poems. And here was this recording that Medbh gave in August of 2016 of reading various poems, including a number of poems from the Blarish Moor collection. And she did a wonderful thing of introducing it and telling a little about her process and talking about some voices that were refracted in the poem. So she gave me little Easter eggs that I went quickly and tried to see where they brought me to. They brought me to places I didn't expect and opened up a lot more doors. As I said, she mentioned 3 voices in a poem that actually turned out to be many more voices. But it was exciting for me to be drawn back into archives, and particularly public. What was important here it was clear to me to see again and again that Medbh chose public archives. These were poems, specifically 3 poems that I was looking at, 2 that were specifically about Bloody Sunday, and then 1 about the Troubles more in general. The titles are The Statement of My Right Honorable Friend, The Questioning of Soldier L, and then Telltale. And so in these poems, then I went into the archives of what was said in the House of Commons, because that was one particular comment. She said this was something that Bernadette Devlin had mentioned. And then I discovered how important that archive was of helping to put together what was in the poem itself. And then certainly very, very important were also the Saville inquiry. So I spent time in the archives and then going back to those texts. But in terms of needing to take models and to refashion them, one of the things that was very helpful to me was to think about the role of the poet, and to think of the role of the poet as, of course, an archivist, but perhaps also a curator. And it was helpful for me to speak. I had an interview, this was during the time of Corona, so I had a Zoom interview with the person who's in charge of the Troubles Archive at the Ulster Museum, and that is Karen Logan. And she told me how she had to rebuild the Troubles Archive and how she deliberately built it through this model of narrative hospitality. And that was incredibly helpful for me, because I had to understand, how can you ethically remember communal events in which you also have the victims and perpetrators stitch together? How can you, bring those two parts together? And one of the things that that Karen Logan had shown me was how she had these different stories, and she said they were like on rosary beads that you could turn, perhaps maybe some of you, if you know, in that collection. And I was seeing so many of the similar moves, the way that a curator would put together the narrative of an exhibit, and particularly an exhibit that, as Karen Logan told me, has a lot of emotion involved. People would come in and weep in this exhibit, and you have narratives in which that are oppositional that you are bringing together, and this is certainly what we see in these poems as well. And then another concept that was helpful for me was, how can we think about history, particularly cultural history, and to do so without feeling, as one often does when one looks at cultural events in the past, and think, I would have done it differently. I would have been so much smarter. And one of the concepts that was helpful for me is this idea of side shadowing, which I had discovered actually in looking at Holocaust poems, and that this was, in particularly, Holocaust theory as a way of considering the past as something that's open and not closed, and I'm very grateful to Shane Alcobia-Murphy for this image of going at the text sideways, and so that you see that all of these different possibilities and potentialities of events remain open, as opposed to imagining there was only one path forward. And this is certainly what those poems shared with us in these the different witnesses of Bloody Sunday. They all were stitching together their different points of view, whether it was Bernadette Devlin or other people from different places, in which they could not make one narrative. And I am so grateful for the way that Maeve built her poems to deliberately make these different narratives have places where, the third poem I go to that had telltales. In that particular poem, she moves to a very different Sarajevo context, but it's told in a way that could have been in Ireland in the Troubles. And the last final image that's so beautiful in terms of a place that's on the, the Sarajevo roses, sort of, where they had from all of the city itself had the wounds of the bomb. What do you do? And they filled them, perhaps some of you have seen this, with red resin to fill the holes. And over time, they got worn and worn down. So all you see are these little fragments of the red resin. So in this particular way, it was sort of the poem itself was giving us clues to how the texts existed outside of the poem and how Maeve brought them in and wove them together. And I'm very grateful for having been on the journey to have gone through many hours of looking at many different texts to sort of, as I said, feel like I was, stitching together what would have been the library card in another era of what Maeve was reading, and to try to understand how those different pieces came together, but deliberately to always show the telltales. So it was a great joy. Also, the other thing that was very useful for me was to see the way that trauma theory also had to be rebuilt, because many people, for a number of decades, once trauma theory became the thing that a lot of people were talking about, also coming out of Holocaust studies, was that there was one particular model of the victim, in which the victim was made static and never able to recover. And I think that what you see in just the last decade with trauma theory of it being pluralistic is giving us a new version of looking at the past, which is much closer to what Maeve was doing in her poems, of letting the victims speak and have agency, and to not be uniformly treated as forever traumatized. That there are ways in which communal telling is also a way, the act of telling the stories and stitching them together with others is a path toward moving to another place. So thank you very much. It's been great fun to have worked on this, and I feel so honored to be in the company with these other fantastic, exquisite articles. And thanks again to Daniela for having done all she did to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for those kind words and for this fantastic and incredibly important contribution to the journal. And I think it's really pertinent that the issue concludes with this article on what you so pertinently again call narrative hospitality and the open engagement of Maev's approach to the terror of the Troubles, but also to poetry writing as such. And you present Maeve, I'd say, as a reader of history, a reader who acknowledges the world and the past to be a place of radical instability, as you say, and multiplicity, a place of trauma and suffering, but also possibility, which again, I think is something that speaks to some of the other articles in the issue. So again, I'd encourage you all to go and read this wonderful contribution to our celebration of Maev's work by Jessica Bundschuh. Our last panelist today is Mary O'Malley-Maddig, who will tell us about the interview with Medbh McGuckian, which Mary conducted together with Maureen Fadem in June 2018. Mary holds a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania, and she works for Villanova University's Irish Studies program in Ireland. She pursues a wide range of research interests and focuses on the linguistic borders of Ireland, the Irish travellers, and contact phenomena between English and Irish in Ireland. Mary is also a published poet. Her most recent book of poems emerged from Salmon Press in 2019, and Medbh McGuckian praised it as an extraordinary book, celebrating the crazy mystery of good agony in a solemn mixture of the banal and the prophetic. And with this, I pass over to you, Mary. Thanks for joining us today to present the interview.
Thank you very much, Daniela. I feel a bit of an imposter in this illustrious company. Usually I'm talking to linguists. I'd like to say, first of all, that it was a great pleasure to be part of this interview project. And I'd like to thank Maureen Ruprecht for inviting me to collaborate with her on this exciting venture. I met Maureen at a roundtable on Medbh McGuckian's work at the American Conference for Irish Studies some, I'd say, 5 years ago. And after that roundtable, we continued to discuss Maev's work, and we had that shared interest. What I was able to bring, I suppose, to the project was my background in sociolinguistics and my ideas about how we might plan the interview so that we wouldn't just go in there and put questions, which from a sociolinguistic point of view would elicit very limited material. And I suppose what we wanted to do was to have an experience for everyone where the floor was shared and where the interviewee can also lead the process. So we're not, we're trying to be as unstructured as possible and just to see what will happen. Because if we only got to put in questions, then that's all we'd have were the answers to our questions. When in fact, what happened was full of surprising sharings and insights. And it was, I found it very interesting, like I hadn't certainly read the interview or listened to the interview for a long time after. And when I came back to it, I couldn't believe how much ground we had covered and how warm it was, and how much myself and Maeve and Maureen made a very interesting threesome. we were very, I think we brought lots of interesting things to it. that day, for example, we spent most of our time talking about Love the Magician, and that just happened. We didn't plan that. I think, in fact, we couldn't find a book or something, and then I think we were going to talk about Blaris Moore, and then we ended up talking about this, and then that was wonderful. So we were there like cozied up in Maeve's sitting room and warmly exchanging our ideas and insights. And there were moments of laughter, quite a few more. I was surprised when I listened again to the interview how much we did laugh, and girly fun, which we won't tell you about. And but there were also some serious exchanges on the history and the state of Irish poetry today. And I think, you know, it's important to say that none of us should be deluded about what it means to be a woman poet in Maeve's generation. And I whinge enough about how hard it is for me at my stage, but I think it was very hard. And she met those challenges, all of them, in a way that puts it up to all of us. And we know her accomplishments are stellar. So she has opened up a path for women writers like me, and I'm really glad that I knew her work very early on in my life. And I was attracted to it, not just because she was a woman writer, because in my generation, I don't know if we had even that understanding. Like when I was at school, I never studied a female writer. But afterwards, I discovered female writers, and one of them that I discovered was Maeve, and I felt connected. But I didn't think of her as a Northern Ireland writer. I thought of her as an Irish writer. And I thought of her as part of my heritage as a poet, as a person writing in Ireland. So there was the fact that she wrote about material that other people didn't dare go near, but also the way that the very interesting and, yeah, wonderful way she put it together. So I'd like to thank you, Maeve, for this interview, which you allowed to be so spontaneous, because, you know, it really did hang on your generosity to us and your welcoming of us. And I think it is an exciting representation of your craft, and also the process of our understanding it. The fact that you can also see the journey we make trying to understand what, you know, what's going on between the three of us. So the interview as a genre allowed the content to emerge naturally in the way that we didn't construct it, we just let it be. And from that exchange, we brought our perspectives, the three of us, to the table. And I think that that was something really worthwhile to do for writing and for criticism. As I said, we focused a lot on Love the Magician, and that led to all kinds of interesting, very natural little discussions of craft and the nitty-gritty of the intertextual poem. So it was a real dialogue of exploration, and I think, you know, that's all I need to say to you about it. I'm still grateful. It must be, is it 2 or 3? It's 3 years, is it? 2, 3 years? I can't believe that, but you know, we're all living in the cave of COVID now. And it was just a lovely way for me to get to know her work in this unique way, and also because I admired her work. And sometimes when you have a, you know, when you're a fan, you can be very disappointed when you meet the person you know, you follow, but I wasn't disappointed. So I hope you enjoy the interview now, and that you have a nice glow after reading it, just as I have now remembering it. And a very happy birthday, Maeve.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mary. And it's really an extremely lively and enlivening exchange you have there indeed. And I recommend the interview to anybody's attention here. I'm really grateful to you, Mary and Maureen, for having come up with the idea of including the audio clips of Maeve and occasionally Maureen reading Out of Life Magician and some of the other collections as well. And to Maeve, of course, for agreeing to have those included. And in this way, I would say we are really making the best of publishing online, introducing a feature that could not have been included, that could not have worked in a printed or copy or physical copy of a journal. Unfortunately, time is against us, so I'd suggest we would leave discussion by the panelists about the contributions to the end, and join it together with the discussion of the poem that Maeve is going to read to us. Maybe that might work as well. But just for fear of losing Maeve's patience, because I notified her that she would have the floor about 15 minutes before now. It's all my fault, of course. I'm the chair here. I should have managed it in a better way. But let me use this moment to invite our special guest tonight, Medbh McGuckian, and to invite her to take the floor indeed and read some of her poems. The issue brings 3 of Maeve's new poems, none of which have been published in print so far, though one of them I believe has appeared in an online publication. So special welcome to you, Maeve, and happy birthday. I have a glass of wine here ready, and I like to invite or encourage anyone here to get a drink as well, so that we can toast Maeve's health towards the end of this event. The birthday itself was last year, but I'm happy that we have been able to come forth with this slightly belated but no less festive celebration of your work and birthday. So again, Maeve, what a privilege to have you here and to have those poems in the issue.
Can you hear me okay, Daniela?
Yes, of course.
You
Perfect.
see me?
Yes.
Can you see
Great.
me? You can see me and hear me.
Yes, we can see you and hear you.
I must say, I've been very moved by all the hard work and wonderful positive responses of all the contributors, because you know, even Seán and Leonsha and other critics who would read my work, and I mean, I'm grateful to Maureen especially for looking at the quotational aspect of my work and yet not condemning it, you know, where I think other people sometimes, yeah, they're quite impressed, and then they work out where this has come from, and then at that point they kind of say, oh, well, it's not very original. And Maureen and the rest of you don't seem to have done that. They don't seem to have, and so that makes me feel very honored, because a lot of the time I do think I'm not very original. But you know, I end up, you know, as I was saying, I'm just chatting away to you, but with the COVID, it's been so funny, because all the libraries that I normally would use would have been closed, and there were no books, and when you did get a book, it was some kind of an e-book or something, and so there weren't any books. So I was reduced to, Maureen will remember that my room is full of these quite old books, and so I was reduced to reading all these old books and trying to make poems out of those. And so I went through them when the library opened. I took this kind of thing about Sylvia Plath for some reason. She seemed very accessible. So I seem to have read everything under the sun about Sylvia Plath. So that's that's something that Maureen and the rest of you can kind of keep in mind for the next article. Anyway, back to these poems. If you know, I don't find a lot of modern, you shouldn't say modern, contemporary poetry terribly interesting sometimes, but I do notice that people like Jory Graham and is it John Bradshaw? I'm not sure. The tendency is for these huge, long poems that go on forever, and they are quite interesting. So for a while, you know, I was trying to write like somebody else. You know, I was trying to write like some of the younger women poets who seem to be getting more, I'm not saying getting more attention, but being very successful and stuff. And for a while, I thought I should try to do what they were doing. And then in these poems, I probably was trying to write these long poems, which I don't know if they work or not. But will I read you the shortest of the long poems? Yeah, I'll read you the shortest one.
That'd be great, and I'll share the text of the poem if it's okay with the rest. With the other.
Are we doing the color mistakes one? Are we doing that one? Color mistakes. Yeah. Okay. So should I start now, Daniela? Okay. Well.
Yes, please. That'd be
yeah.
great. Thank you. Thank you, Meg.
Well, color mistakes. I'll talk a wee bit about it just first, and then I'll read it. And when I write a poem, usually I've no idea what it's going to be about, as you probably well know. I wouldn't know. I would have the scraps and the bits and weave them and try to make a kind of like a short story sometimes out of them. So this one, as I'm at a kind of, I'm kind of like at a watershed as regards muses. Usually I feel that you need a muse, you need someone that you're writing the poem about or for, who is, I'm not saying superior to you, but is like someone that you love and that you admire and that you remember. And even if they are dead, you're still. So this one is like, I don't know about the experience of other people or other women or other men at the minute, but I'm at the stage where I have a lot of memories of the mistakes I made, the romantic mistakes I made, the people that I went out with, or the people that I fancied, or the people that I cared about, or the people I had relationships with, that were very important at the time, and yet sort of they went wrong for reasons. They went wrong for different reasons, and could they have been salvaged? And so that you go on and on in your mind, you're thinking over happy times with someone, maybe when you were just 16 or something, maybe when you were 20, different things in your life to do with, I suppose, discovering your sexuality. And so this poem kind of fits with a lot of those people in the past. And I was focusing on one in particular, but it fits with a lot of them as well. So I'll read it with that in mind, and you can see if it is comic or tragic. I don't know which it is. Okay. So color mistakes. Well before they reached London, they both knew they had passed the pitch of their loving. Again, the house, the cloud deck, average weather, keeping his back to the window behind his desk. He assembled the terminal documents he had collected with so much effort over the previous months, odd numbers of the Humanist Quarterly. I didn't know how light and dangerous the rope, the world jammed with unshed roses, rosettes. Is that area of white in my bedroom mine? A word is missing here. He feels the word subside in a right-hand tremor, since spirit is never transparent to itself, or another doubling of meaning is taking place here. Time's hand touching, after time has flown, hangs the dated death by a blue heavenly, a reckless blossoming, like the vine sponge to the highest eye. Soothing fictions. The real change is less in the city than in himself. His book was not about the world, but about itself. His wantonness was the appropriate response to such a chaotic place. The bell lips hoping to climb to fame on your coattails. The work will flower and he die, single European sky, the empty spaces. In his story, ready to face the next downturn. The new, thin, foreseeable roots, a long-breathed melody, like a long, prolonged and repeated kiss. The map of most of the sky is stale. A long strip would blow the star apart. Stray radiation from the newly dead exits a tunnel to find itself back at its entrance. A river cannot, we are told, rise above its source. I feel your radio quiet pulse among your hard drives nested folders, wrapping our heads around copies of this book, of you and me. The silver poisoned sky mistakes your color as a soundless event, a victory garden where snow is replaced by gloom. The shroud pin is staining Virgin Mary in a dress with triple dot motif. And just as he reworked it, so it fell apart. So.
Thank you, Maeve. This is absolutely amazing. It's such a privilege to be able to hear you speak about the poem and then read it at the same time. You are faced here, of course, with a bunch of your critics, but also a group of incredibly engaged readers of your poems. And I'm sure that each of us could start anywhere in the poem and live for months with that moment and just make a whole world of it. And without trying to pry into your sources, being inquisitive about your process or judging it in any way, it has been incredibly, again, enriching for us to hear about some of the emotional background for this, or episodic background for this poem that you have outlined. But would it be possible maybe for you to say if there is a particular point, particular image, particular poem, moment in the poem where it all started for you? Was it? Yeah.
Well, it was the idea of London, I suppose, you know, and it was the city. I'm not very good at calling cities by their names, but so it was a big thing for me to mention London as a place, as a real place. When I talk about the city, you know, as you quoted that poem, "Who is your city?" I don't always have the courage to talk about Belfast, but I always mean Belfast. I'm sure I always mean Belfast when I say city. So it's talking about two young lovers who try to escape this parochial, what's the word, parochial and provincial province of a place. And he is kind of reading and he's writing books, and she's lagging behind him. She's well behind him in many sorts of experiences. So I think it kind of captures my naivety in this particular, and in many, but I mean in basically all my relationships, I'm sure I was totally naive. And you know, it's hard to admit that to yourself, that but maybe it's because I always chose people or men or boys who seemed to have more idea about the world than I did, you know. So
but
I think
it's you who end up writing the poem, and it's of course London is Belfast in this poem. That would have been, of course, our next question, I bet, for many of us, and we have answered it already. That's so amazing. I don't want to take up too much time here asking a question myself. So would there be anyone else here who want to get their foot in? Maureen is raising her hand.
I just have thinking about what you're saying, what maybe you were just saying, you know, and thinking, is that kind of a universal experience for women? That we feel like the guys we've always chosen have a better sort of sense of the world or are more comfortable in the world, and therefore we think that they understand the world better, right? Then I think that's I just feel like that's much beyond you, May, you know. Yeah, and I also was thinking that you were saying like he's the one writing and you're lagging behind, but what I was thinking in this poem is that you're watching him. Yeah. You're the voyeur, right? Watching him and turning that into a poem. So yeah, great.
True, that's true. I mean, it's complicated, you know. There's a lot of like deathy stuff in it, you know, and I think it's because, I mean, at the minute I'm at a strange point where I'm kind of curious about some people that I used to know, and are they still alive, and where are they, and I don't know why that is, but maybe, as you say, it's maybe common to, I mean, the birthday being the 70, and you sort of think, God, you know, it's 50 years since such and such happened, and it's so vivid. The memory is incredibly vivid. So I think that one was, I don't know if I create a very vivid memory of bits and pieces of the time, but some of the imagery certainly is like the Virgin Mary. It comes in like this idea is that this person, what's the word? Not stole your virginity. Of course they don't steal your virginity as such, but they like to think they do. Is that right, Maureen? So yeah, that idea there is just at the end, but I don't give it a lot of time. I think the word kiss sitting out on its own is very, very important, you know, as when you're very young and you don't know what a kiss is even, you know, and you don't know what it could lead to. And so it sits there like some kind of mistake, I think.
Yeah, I can see that Jessica is raising her hand there now. The question.
Yes, thank you very much. I often in poems, I love to find the line where it seems to kind of everything ripple out from. And it seems to me a line that is just kind of at the heart of this poem, particularly after you speaking about the process of reflection that maybe initiated it, is that beautiful line that sort of is split halfway through, time's hand, then line break, touching after time has flown. And how gorgeous to think about the hand of time, but this imagery of something that's past, but there it is, still having a physical presence, a tactile kind of way of reaching the speaker. So thank you, beautiful.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, when I was reading it, I kind of liked that. I kind of liked that itself. You know, I was intrigued by the vine sponge because Maureen and some others would have, you know, my Catholicism is so embedded in me and in my, and yet when I try to say the rosary, for example, I try really hard. Well, I try that hard, but I find that the actual crucifixion scene is not something I can imagine. I am supposed to sit there and imagine it and go through all that. So every so often in a poem, as I say about the Virgin Mary and then the vine sponge, is like I try to get a bit of time off my purgatory in a sense by referring to it, to these mysteries that I really can't deal with. But if I pick that out, yeah, I think, well, that is like, because it's really about sin, you know, it's really about, in fact, it's not just about venial sin, it's about mortal sin. And the venial sin is so, is not that bad, but the losing of the virginity, it was a mortal sin to me, you know, and that's underneath the poem quite a lot, I think, you know.
Amazing. Yes, brilliant. I can see that Maureen wants to come in there.
I just wanted to say, I love, Jessica, you're pointing out, right, that like the one line reading, right, the importance of one line where it feels like everything extends from that and comes from it and goes, you know. And the one for me is the line that reads, "Is that area of white in my bedroom mine?"
Yeah.
Oh, I love that line.
Well, again, I think that is the color, that's the only color she really mentions. But the white obviously is tarnished by the loss of the virginity. So is that area of white, is that all I have left of my own unmortal self, I suppose? Yeah, I don't know. The thing about climbing to fame on your coattails, I think that refers to when I was young and there were no women poets, hardly. And I mean, I was reading a book about women philosophers the other day, and all of them seemed to have to climb to fame on the coattails of a male philosopher. And they all just, you know, hung on to somebody till they, and Heidegger or somebody. And I think that's what I did, because I had to do that to get anywhere. I had to sort of, I don't know, what's the word? Love these men who were poets and love these men who were writers and critics, and somehow then discard them or be discarded by them. So again, I think there's quite a lot of you know, a lot of suffering in many of these lines, you know. But I don't know if you have the one, I was going to, the one that ends with Saint Augustine, where's that? There's a quotation. Sometimes the quotations are, yeah, here it is. The quotations are sometimes lovingly chosen, Maureen, as you know, but in other cases, you come across these incredible quotations that you cannot put into your poem, but you must include them as the sort of like reference point. I mean, and something to just think, wow, I mean, not wow, but how could somebody possibly have written that, you know? So this is Saint Augustine, who really, like, he was very sinful as far as we know, and in love with his mother or something, wasn't he? So anyway, so this is just a quotation that I found of his, and I just had to put it into the poem. The body of a man is as superior to a woman's as the soul is to the body. The body and then the body. So what is that about? What is, I mean, have you got that yet? The body of a man is as superior to a woman's as the soul is to the body. I mean, unless that was badly translated or something, like, did he actually think that, or what is that? Can you work that out, Maureen? You're better than me at working things out.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's shocking. I don't know if someone else wants to take a stab. I mean, the first thought that came to my mind reading that and reading it again now with you is, you know, we give birth, which is a miracle, and like some kind of weird, I don't know. Yeah, anyway, that was the first thought that I had. But does someone else have?
Yeah, Fanni
Fanni,
there. Yeah, Fanni there, who wants to contribute.
I don't want to attempt to interpret the quotation. What I was wondering at is if there is a special reason you put it at the end of the poem instead of, you know, at the beginning, as it happens in some other poems. So I was really struck by that when I looked at the poem, and I would be really interested to know.
Again, I think that was a color mistake. I did put it as an addendum or a pudenda or a pudendum. But I normally would put something at the beginning. It was probably just a little experiment to see what it would sound like, because it is so shocking. I thought maybe if I put it at the beginning, people would be so offended that they might not even want to read the poem. They might think that I was endorsing this in some strange way. But what I was thinking about was when we were coming to do this, and I was reading it and I was saying, okay, so so Gus, or whatever you call you, Gus, you know, if God had decided that a man's body was so much better than a woman's, well, then why did he not bring Christ into the world through a man's body and just have the seed in the man's body and then put it into this totally inferior woman's body that you might find lying around somewhere? Do you know? So, you know, it's sort of like saying, you know, the whole of incarnation is kind of questioned here, isn't it? You know, like, so Mary's body was the one that was immaculate, and Mary's body was the one that took on the deity in her, not in the man. So I think that kind of refutes his position. Don't you think?
It's really interesting. And I mean, St. Augustine also wrote and said wonderful things. And there is also the sentence that just so stands out. And And I really love how you put it as kind of an afterthought, but it's kind of behind all of this.
Yeah, I'm sure it was an afterthought for him too, but
yeah, but you also have mentioned that you have been reading Sylvia Plath, and that would have been my final question. Like,
yeah,
as a reader of your poetry, I feel especially welcome in your poems. Maybe thanks to the fact that you don't care so much about me as a reader. I don't know if this is a shared a kind of experience, and yet we know that your writing process is very much based in your reading experience. So the last question that we could have was what you were reading at the moment, and you have, when you started talking tonight, you somehow preempted all the questions that I, or maybe some of the others could have. So it has been absolutely enriching and then brilliant to have you here. So maybe this is the moment where we could all raise our glasses and thank you. And,
thank you. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Great to me.
Thank you all. Thank you. I'm so touched, and I'm very, very happy to be with you tonight.
I love you, Maeve.
Love you so much.
I think we all do, definitely.
Daniela, can we
So-
take down the screen share so that we can see?
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
reminding me of that. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the poem.
let's
I'm
do it
sorry
again.
about that. Yes, let's do it again. Okay,
Yeah.
so happy
Happy
birthday,
Be singing
Maeve.
it. We should be
Thank
singing.
you.
Good.
And we are all looking forward to your next book, of course.
Oh God. Yeah.
I'd say that these articles that we have gathered in the issue show us many new possible ways of reading your work, and they also demonstrate in their diverse ways how your poetry has always instructed us as readers, made us better readers. So thank you very much for that.
Very, very grateful, and I hope you're all go on for many, many years to come.
The same to you. So before I pass over to Kathy and Seán for any closing remarks, I'd like to repeat my thanks to all of us who have joined us here tonight, to the contributors, thanks to everybody, and look at those poems and articles. The issue is online, and you can access it for free, of course. Thanks to Seán Murphy for having been the initial mastermind behind this project, and huge thanks again to all the contributors and to my colleagues at the Vice Editorial Board, and to those amazing students at Ruprecht, to Seán, indeed, for those last-minute important editorial interventions and for her wonderful support all along. And thank you once again for your hard work and on the volume, and for sticking with me throughout the process. And last but not least, again, let me salute our guest tonight and our poet, Medbh McGuckian. Thank you, Maeve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela.
It is, I pass over to Kathy, I believe it is.
Seán, do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, sure, I don't mind. I don't mind. Thank you. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you to all of our contributors tonight, and thank you in particular to Maeve for joining us, for reading your poetry so memorably, and for giving us this extraordinary insight into your work and into the inspiration for your work. And if anything, it struck me, and you described those horrific scenes from what you've been reading recently, it makes it all the more important that you continue to write, and that poetry continues to shine a light. You know, we're living through a dark time right now, really, aren't we? We're all living through great uncertainty and worried about Omicron and so on, but poetry has been hugely important, I know, to so many people in this time as a source of joy, as we've been going through, I don't know, 4 or 5 lockdowns at this time, and we turn to literature as a way to sustain our hope in humanity and in the future. And thank you for that as one of the great Irish poets who've been so important to so many people. So before I finish, just to say very quickly, and I'll hand over to Kathy then, we have some forthcoming issues in the new year, just to let you know that RISE is continuing in 2022 with a special double issue that will be divided between spring and autumn, looking at the theme of Irish sexual liberation and its literature, and that's co-edited by Dr. Robert Brassu and Dr. Lorna Saidoro. So that will be available in the spring. And as I said at the beginning, we welcome proposals for either themed issues or proposals for or submissions to non-themed issues. I've put the address in the chat there, so if you have ideas or if you have proposals, please do contact me at rise@efacis.eu. And thank you all for being with us tonight, and I'll hand over to Kathy now.
Yes, and I also want to thank you, of course, Maeve, for joining us here. It's been a great pleasure and an honor. And it was lovely to have you join us here and hearing you read and discuss your poetry. I would also like to thank you, Seán. I think it must be said again that we can't thank you enough for having restarted RISE and to really turn it into what the journal now is after the first two issues in 2021. And I look very much forward to working with you on that and to work under your wise guidance on the next RISE issues. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Daniela, and to all the wonderful contributors. It is just the last thing I would like to say. We also continue with the roundtable events. And of course, those that launch our RISE issues are also a double EFACIS event and therefore of particular interest to many of you. The next roundtable event will also be super interesting. It will take place on the 13th of January, so roughly a month from now. And it's dealing with the topic Irish language, the Irish language in Europe. And it's organized by the Secretary of EFACIS, Radvan Marcus, who is really a great expert on the topic and will assemble more expertise. And I look forward to a very interesting discussion of the Irish language in Europe. And it would be lovely to meet you again on the 13th of January. Thank you all again. Have a good holiday. And if you celebrate Christmas, have a Merry Christmas and very Happy New Year.